All right. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're tuning in from. Thank you all for joining us today for what I believe to be a very, very important topic, advanced college savings concepts. You very well may know Marcus Rather, as well as myself, Emmett Corboy, financial advisors with Cetera Investors, and thank you for the trust that you placed in us to help you with your finances. Who you may not know, who's another host this evening, is Brian Parker. Brian is a very trusted partner of ours. He's with John Hancock. I'll let him kind of give his full introduction, but as you know, our clients on tonight's event will notice, we always, as time goes on, try and connect you with, where we can help out. We're going to do the best we can. What in other areas, maybe it's taxes or estate planning or other things like that, we're going to make connections with things like attorneys and accountants. And, in this topic of college savings, we've got one of the, masters and experts in college savings and 529 specifically to bring you information here today. So we are very, very thankful to Brian for joining us today. And we're also, very just excited to hear him speak. This is a very important topic, and we'll kind of, talk more about why that is important. I'll just kind of share for me personally, I've been an advisor for 13 years now, and this has been something that I've, spoken to many, many clients with over all of those years. But I'll tell you, it was about 2.5, 3 years ago, or really probably 2.5 years ago, that this topic started to become even more important to me. You may see kind of in the background some photographs, family photos, family pictures. I promise I didn't put these up specifically for this event. It just kind of happened. I just last week decided to decorate the office a little bit more like this. But, once we started to, have children, my wife and I, and, I started to think about, their future, education was, at the forefront of my mind, and, saving for that education started to become obviously very important as well. So Brian's going to walk through obviously a lot of the details on things tonight. I wanted to, kind of tee him up and give, a bit of an introduction. But I think that, you will certainly find some great value and great information. So if you're able to jot down any notes, enter questions into the Q&A box in the webinar. We'll get to questions most likely kind of at the end. I believe Brian's going to get through everything in about 25 minutes or so. So we will have some time for Q&A kind of toward the end of tonight as well. Marcus, anything you want to add before we toss it over to our esteemed colleague, Brian?
Just again, house rules, question and answer feature. Please feel free to utilize that throughout our conversation this evening. I'll be monitoring that. As we said before, we're going to be addressing that towards the back end for the sake of time. But don't be afraid to let those questions fly. So I'm ready to get it started. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right.
Awesome. All right. Well, I guess it's my turn now. So thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Emmett, for having me. And thank you, everyone else, for dialed in here tonight. As Emmett mentioned, my name is Brian Parker. I work for John Hancock Investment Management, and my title is I'm the 529 Southeast Sales Director. You may be asking yourself, well, what in the world does that mean? So ultimately what that means is I've been in the financial services industry for about 15 years, variety of different roles, and working specifically with 529 education savings plans for about the past decade. I cover a geographical region that goes from Delaware all the way down to Florida, and then all the way over to Louisiana, so kind of the East and then Gulf Coast. I work with financial advisors in that region. There's about 150,000 of them, but of course, I can't work with that many. I can only work with a handful. So we partner with the best of the best in the industry, which is why I'm here today with Marcus and Emmett. And so if you're working with them, of course, you know that you're in good hands. And if you're not working with them already, well, you may want to give them a call after this meeting here. So with that, I wanted to share this screen here. So I'll talk about my family a little bit today. I know Emmett mentioned that he has some young kids there. So my little sister, she's an elementary school teacher. In fact, I was on vacation with my extended family just a couple of weeks ago, and she had all 3 of her boys there, including her 6-week-old. And I'll tell you, as a teacher and as a mother of 3 boys, it is amazing the things that she can get these kids to do in a nice way. And I can't think of a better term except for manipulation. The things that she can get these kids to do, every parent, I might tell her all the time she should write a book, right? But I think about some of the things that we would joke, like, what did our teachers tell us that they're still telling the kids today? You know, things like it takes 7 years to digest gum. Little Timmy, don't swallow that gum, right? It's the springtime. Birds are hatching. Sometimes a bird falls out of the nest. So don't touch that baby bird because his mother's not going to come back. Not really related to teaching, but I like to watch football, big NFL fan in the fall, and most people are getting buffalo wings. Me personally, my girlfriend and I, we get Chinese food. We call it Chinese Sunday. And of course, with that Chinese food meal, you get a fortune cookie. And everybody knows the Napoleon complex, right? You can't see it on screen here. I'm 6'3", so I don't have to worry about that. But I had a couple friends that were, shorter, and they were, of course, angry. So I always made fun of them. Call them little Napoleons, right? Napoleon short, that angry Frenchman. And you may be sitting there wondering to yourself, well, what in the world does this have to do with 529? And what in the world are these things even have to do in common? Well, if this was live, I'd ask you to raise your hand and answer, shout out right now. But I'm sure at least one of you on the call knows this, and maybe all of you do, but these are common misconceptions. These are all things that we have thought at some point in time to be true, but they're actually false. So if you or your kids are gum swallowers, don't worry. While gum is indigestible, you can't digest it, it will pass through you just as fast as any other food. If you are in the business of touching baby birds, I would recommend you find a new business. However, don't worry, that mother is going to come back and return to the nest. Fortune cookies, little known fact, they actually originated in Japan. Never heard of a Japanese fortune cookie. I like Japanese food too, but never got one there. And then Napoleon, he came in at 5'7". Well, that's an inch shorter than the average American male of today. It was an inch taller than the average French male of his time. So he was actually above average height. And the reason I bring this up is, as I mentioned, I travel to Southeast. I work with advisors. I work with their clients. And I hear tons of misconceptions when it comes to 529 plans. I hear things like they're not flexible. I can only use it for college. They're expensive. I can only use it for the state in which I reside. It's going to hurt my ability to get financial aid. I can just put money away in a savings account. I can borrow money and get student loans. I don't need to put money aside for education savings. All these different things that I hear that we're going to address here tonight. So, who really cares about being able to afford college? Well, it's pretty much everybody, whether it's a high net worth earner, a lower income family, but really the middle class, right? So the middle class is worried. In fact, close to 50% of families say they're overwhelmed when thinking about saving and investing for education. So that's why Marcus and Emmett are here today, is they're going to help you and make sure that you're not overwhelmed when you're thinking about your goals for saving and investing, whether that's retirement planning, life insurance, education, you name it, they can help you. And then over 60% of parents, when they look at the cost of education, say it's going to be necessary for their child to receive aid. Well, why is that? Well, college education is expensive. In fact, we're all hearing about inflation in the news today. Education has been inflating at about 5% a year, year over year for close to 20 years now. If you have a newborn, on this chart here, you can see there's purple bars and there's blue bars. The purple bars are 4-year in-state public tuition, and the blue bars are 4-year out-of-state private tuition. So today's newborn, you're talking $230,000 all in for an in-state public school, and you're talking $530,000 all in for a 4-year private school. And if your kids are very smart and they want to go to an Ivy League school, they'll think of a Harvard, a Yale, a Stanford, or a Vanderbilt in the Southeast. Those schools are quoting $750,000 or more all in for their 4-year undergraduate degree. And I'm part of that millennial generation, for better or for worse. Try not to make fun of me too much for that. But millennials, my generation, 50% of all millennials graduated from college with some sort of student loans. On average, that was about $30,000. I compare that to my parents' generation. They're the baby boomers. About 9% of baby boomers graduated with some sort of student loans, and that's about $9,000 on total. So these subsequent generations have been cost of schools going up, and therefore we're borrowing more money and we're taking on more debt, right? We've seen all the headlines all those millennials are living in parents' basements, they're not getting married, they're not forming houses, they're not buying cars. Well, it turns out none of that's really true. They're just 5 to 10 years behind those previous generations. And so the question that I then get asked is, Brian, is it worth it? Is it worth it to pay for education? Is it worth it to send my kids to school? Is it worth it for my kids to borrow loans? And I would say resoundingly the answer to that question is yes. No matter what generation you're part of, throughout time, the more education that you have, the better off historically that you are. So in this shaded gray box, you'll see here, once again, is that millennial generation. The green bar is a high school diploma. If you're a high school graduate, you're making on average about $50,000 a year. If you have a 2-year degree, some college or other type of education, you're talking about $62,000 a year. And if you have a 4-year college degree or more, you're talking about $105,000 a year. So you're talking about $50,000 of excess earning power per year. And you're talking about $2 to $2.5 million of excess earning power over a lifetime. In addition to that, you're less likely to smoke. You have a longer life expectancy. You're less likely to be unemployed. If you become unemployed, it's easier to change careers. So there's all sorts of hidden other benefits when it comes to education. And so today we're specifically going to talk about a vehicle that you can use to invest and save for that education, which is called a 529 education savings plan. So a 529 plan, you fund it with after-tax dollars, so money that you've already paid tax on. However, it's going to grow tax deferred, similar to like a Roth IRA, and it's going to come out tax-free if you use it for what's called a qualified education expense. In addition to that, 529s have favorable gifting strategies. So an individual tax filer can gift someone $17,000 in a year. A married couple that's filing jointly can gift $34,000 in a year. With the 529, you can utilize something called accelerated gifting, which is 5 years of gifting up front at once. That's $85,000 of a 5-year gift if you're an individual tax filer, or $170,000 up front if you're a married couple filing jointly. Within a 529 plan, you have an investment lineup. There's going to be a variety of investment choices in that 529 plan, which often you're going to be working with a qualified financial advisor like Marcus and Emmett on the call here today that are going to help you pick those investment options, those portfolios, make sure it matches your risk tolerance and your time horizon. And you can use 529 plans, of course, for a variety of education choices. That's the education choices, that's your qualified education expense that you can take it out tax-free. If we were having this call about 20 years ago, this would be a college savings plan. However, right now, it's really an all-encompassing education savings plan. You can use this for a ton of different things. So you can use it for your traditional college. That's a 4-year degree, tuition, and fees. You can use it for room and board. That's both on campus and off campus. You can use it to purchase your books, computers, other required equipment. If you have a special needs beneficiary, you can use it for them in some cases. And 529s recently have been expanded for private school. That's for K through 12. Keep in mind that's just for $10,000 per year, and that is for tuition only. So unlike undergraduate, we can use it for other stuff. K through 12 is tuition only, and it's $10,000 per year per beneficiary. You can also use 529 plans now to pay off student loans. It's fairly limited. It's a lifetime total of $10,000 that you can use for student loan repayments. In most states, you can now use 529 plans for apprenticeship programs. So that's the fees for those apprenticeship programs. So think, my brother-in-law, married to my sister, who's a teacher I mentioned before, was an electrician. He could have used the 529 for his apprenticeship program. Plumbers, carpenters, things like that. You can also use 529s for vocational school, tech school, community college. So think things like a certified auto mechanic, a welder, X-ray technician, things like that. You can use 529s for graduate school, your MBA, your law degree, your doctorate program, right? There's a lot of things that you can use a 529 for. A couple things that we get questions on that are actually not qualified. That's going to include insurance. That's going to include sports like intramural sports, club fees, so sorority or fraternity fees, transportation. So you can use a 529 for your study abroad program. There's also about 380 plus schools overseas that you can use a 529 for. However, you cannot use a 529 to get there. So you can't use it for your car, you can't use it for gas, you can't use it for a bus or a plane, things of that nature. But 529s, you can use it for most types of education at this point in time. So you have that flexibility, right? That's one of the most common misconceptions I hear, that oh, I can only use it for college tuition. And if my kid doesn't go to college, well, then I can't, use it. Well, you can use it for almost any type of education. And now with the passing of what's called the Secure Act 2.0, which went into law on December 29th, 2022, starting next year in 2024, you can now roll 5 to 9 plans into the Roth IRA of the 5 to 9 plan beneficiary. There's a number of rules that you need to be aware of here. That 5 to 9 plan has to be around for at least 15 years. The assets that you're moving from the 5 to 9 plan to the Roth IRA have to be in the plan for at least 5 years. Is subject to your annual Roth IRA contribution limits. So if you could do this year in 2023, that'd be $6,500. It'll be subject to whatever the Roth IRA contribution limit is next year in 2024. There's a lifetime total that you're going to be able to roll over of $35,000. But this is a nice win. So if, say, you overfunded the 5 to 9 plan by accident, your student, gets a scholarship, you just have too much money in the 5 to 9 plan, well, those assets are no longer trapped. You can now move them into that Roth IRA for the beneficiary. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, you can use 5 to 9 plans for the junior colleges, the community colleges, vocational schools, tech schools. You can also use them for yourself, right? You can use it for, say, cooking school or a golf class. I had a gentleman had excess money in his son's 5 to 9 plan. He changed the beneficiary from his son to himself. He enrolled at a local community college that offered a golf class through a PGA professional. He drew down some of the money for the 5 to 9 to pay for that class. But remember, you can also use a 5 to 9 plan for required equipment. So what's required if you're going to play golf? Well, he went out and he bought a new pair of golf shoes, a new polo, some new golf pants, golf bag, golf clubs, golf balls. He's able to spend down that excess 5 to 9 for himself, right? I had someone else, and she really liked art and had, done art for herself her whole life, but she had worked in business. She retired, had some excess money in a kid's 5 to 9 plan, and took a pottery class, right? So there's all these different things that you can use a 5 to 9 plan for. All right, so we'll take a quick break there, and that's the overview of 5 to 9s. Of course, there's other investment vehicles that you can use. And when we see people saving and investing for education, almost always what studies will show is it sits in that bucket of taxable investments. And most people are putting money aside in their checking or savings account. So what happens there is it's not invested, so it's not keeping up with inflation, both normal inflation or the inflation of tuition, right, which has been greater historically than just regular inflation. And then the other vehicle that we see the most is on the far left in green is the UGMAs and UPMAs accounts. So that stands for Unified Gift to Minor Accounts and Unified Trust to Minor Accounts. These are custodial accounts. The major benefit of a custodial account is you as a parent or other to be the custodian. So you control the assets for that child. You can make investment changes up until what's called the age of majority. The age of majority is going to depend on the state that you reside in. It's 18 in many states, 21 in other states. Once you fund that UGMA and UPMA, though, it's the beneficiary's assets. It's irrevocable, so you can never revoke that back to yourself. You can't change it to, say, another sibling, so you don't have full control over those assets, right? There's also an impact on financial aid, and we'll get to that in just a few slides. Versus a 5 to 9 plan, if you're the account holder, your mom and dad, your grandma and grandpa, your aunt and uncle, whomever, you maintain full control over those assets. So you can change the beneficiary, you can reallocate the assets, you can move it back to yourself to go use it for that PGA golf class, right? Those assets, when you fund the 5 to 9 plan, are out of your estate. It's technically a gift to the beneficiary, so the assets are removed from your estate. However, you maintain full control of those assets. UGMAs and UPMAs have some tax benefits around the kiddie tax. I'm not a CPA, so we won't get into the nitty-gritty of that here today, but just know with the 5 to 9 plan, as I mentioned before, it's going to grow tax deferred, and if you're using it for education, it comes out tax-free. And the UGMA and UPMA is considered an asset of the student, so FAFSA will look at 20% of the value of that UGMA and UPMA to go towards your ability to pay for college, therefore reducing your ability to get financial aid. Versus a 5 to 9 plan, FAFSA only looks at 5.6% 0.64% of the value of that 5 to 9 plan that's owned either by mom or dad or by the kids. So you could actually move your UGMA-NUTMA, if you have one that's existing right now, into a 5 to 9 plan. If you were to do that, what most people do is they stop contributing to their UGMA-NUTMA and they move it to the 5 to 9 plan. Keep in mind, the custodial rules of the UGMA-NUTMA still apply, that you can't change the owner and you can't change the beneficiary. However, it's going to grow tax deferred, just like a 5 to 9 would, and it'll come out tax free if you use it for one of those qualified education expenses. So the custodial rules still apply, but it's growing tax deferred, comes out tax free for education, and you're potentially increasing your ability to get financial aid there. All right, so there's in-state 5 to 9 plans, there's national 5 to 9 plans, so all 50 states have a 5 to 9 plan associated with them. Some states only offer what's called direct sold plans, meaning you have to go direct to the state on your own. You have to fill out the paperwork, you have to pick the investment options, you have to pick your risk tolerance, you have to make sure you're structuring that plan, properly for your needs, versus some states offer both a direct sold and an advisor sold plan, meaning you can use that plan with a financial advisor and they're going to help you, with everything as part of your all-encompassing, financial plan. Depending on the state you're in, there's different tax rules or benefits. So if you're in one of these blue states, there's 7 of them, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Montana, Arizona, Missouri, Arkansas, Kansas. These are what's called tax parity states, meaning you get a tax deduction for contributing to a 5 to 9 plan from that state, but you can use any of the 50 state 5 to 9 plans. If you're in one of these green states, North Carolina, Florida, New Jersey, Delaware, to name a few, there is no state tax deduction for using that in-state plan. So you may want to use that state plan, you may not. If you're in one of these states, I think most people are in Virginia, you also have South Carolina, Georgia, West Virginia, a few nearby, Maryland's another one, where they have a state tax deduction. That's for that in-state plan only. So for example, Virginia, they have a state tax deduction for that in-state plan. They also offer an advisor sold plan. When you're looking at those states, right, depending on the state that you're in, you might have a really good deduction, you might have a really bad deduction, you might have no deduction, you might be able to use an advisor, you might not be able to use an advisor, there's fees, there's performance, there's investment options. There's a lot of things that you want to consider when looking at that plan. It's not just necessarily the state that you live in, because you can use any of the 50 state 5 to 9 plans, regardless of what state you live in, regardless of what state you're going to live in the future, regardless of what state your beneficiaries are going to go to school in. So you have that flexibility of looking at different plans in the state you reside, if that makes sense for your situation. All right, so financial aid. This is a big one. So financial aid, there's 2 types of aid. It's self-help aid and it's gift aid. Fairly self-explanatory. Self-help aid, you're helping yourself. Typically, that's going to be a work study. You work and you earn those assets. Or financial aid, where you're borrowing money, right, and then you're paying it back at an interest rate. So it's a loan, right? Most financial aid is loans. Gift aid is a scholarship. It's a gift. So scholarships typically are going to be, scholastic, merit, needs-based, or athletic. However, about 10% of American students get a scholarship, and once again, that's about a $10,000 scholarship on average. So the odds are of getting a scholarship are pretty low. If you do get a scholarship, though, you can actually withdraw up to the amount of the scholarship out of your 5 to 9 plan. There'll be no penalty to do that. You just have to pay taxes on those earnings. So when calculating financial aid, it's a fairly straightforward calculation of how much aid could I get. They look at what's the total cost of attendance minus something that's called the expected family contribution. And note that that phrase, expected family contribution, next year is going to change to student aid index. So just that phrase is going to change. So it's cost minus expected family contribution equals the pool in which you can get aid. So how do we calculate that student aid index or expected family contribution? Well, they look at assets and they look at income. And this is for FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. So they look at 50% of students' income north of an allowance of approximately $7,000. So every dollar over that allowance, 50% of that for the student will go towards their expected family contribution and reduce the amount of aid they can get. They look at 20% of student assets. think taxable assets, right? This is going to include those UGMAs and those UPMAs, checking accounts, savings accounts, brokerage accounts, things of that nature. Parent assets, you're only looking at 5.64% of the value of parent assets. A 5 to 9 plan, as I mentioned before, that's owned by the student or the parent falls under that bucket. The UGMA and UPMA that normally we have a 20% negative hit, if you move that to the 5 to 9 UGMA and UPMA, that falls under that parent bucket of 5.64%. Once again, think taxable assets, checking, savings, brokerage, 5 to 9 plans. FAFSA is looking at your assets as of the day that you fill out FAFSA. Does not include things like houses, lands, Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, qualified annuities, life insurance, things of that nature. The parent income is a fairly large range here on the screen. It's between 22 to 47%. That is because they're looking at your modified adjusted gross income. They're also looking at the total cost of tuition for that family and the total number of dependents enrolled. So depending on the number of kids you have enrolled at once, you may get aid if you say have 3 enrolled all at once, whereas if you just had 1 enrolled, maybe you didn't get any aid, right? So I have an aunt and uncle. They have 2 kids in college right now, 2 in high school. Their first child got no financial aid, so they almost didn't fill out FAFSA. Their second child, because their income didn't go up, but he went to a really expensive school, they got a huge chunk of financial aid. So it was very helpful for them. So make sure you're filling out FAFSA. In fact, FAFSA is going to get a lot easier. So if you're filling it out this October 1st in 2023 and you filled it out previously, you're going to be very happy. It's a lot shorter. It's going from about 108 questions down to about 35 questions. It's going to tie into your IRS tax returns. So it's just feeding in automatically. So it's a lot easier to fill out FAFSA. If you're a divorced, separated family, blended family, there's some changes here on the negative side of things. So previously they looked at FAFSA for financial aid. Who did the kids spend the most time with? Who was the guardian? Now they're looking at who has the most assets and income starting next year. So that could potentially impact the aid that you're getting. And then the other big one is grandparents. So it used to be grandparents, distributions from a grandparent-owned 5 to 9 plan was considered income to that student, right? Which is it could be a big hit. So we had to talk about when to take distributions from a grandparent-owned 5 to 9 plan, or do we want to change the owner from grandparents to parents? Well, starting in 2024, 2025 school year, those grandparent-owned 5 to 9 plans are not going to be counted as income to the student. So that's a huge win in terms of maximizing ability to get financial aid. And if there's anybody on the call here that has an estate, tax issue, 5 to 9 plans can also be used as an estate planning tool. As I mentioned at the start of this call, you can utilize what's called accelerated gifting with 5 to 9 plans, which is just 5 years of gifting all up front at once. So if you're a married couple filing jointly, that's $170,000 up front, which is considered a completed gift to that beneficiary. But remember, if you're the account holder, you're the only one that has control over these assets. So this is the only investment vehicle that exists in the world in which you can pull the assets out of your federal taxable estate and maintain full control over those assets. If whoever donated those funds into the 5 to 9 plan does pass away during that 5-year period, just note that a prorated portion of that gift will go back into the estate for state tax purposes. So guys, I know we're up at time here. So at this point, that wraps up all the prepared remarks that I had. So we can open it up to any questions that we have.
Wow. Brian, you're a genius. I mean, I think I'm still stuck a bit on the story of the family that, took college courses for golf and had the wonderful strategy of buying all the supplies between the bag, the shoes, the clubs. I mean, it's just phenomenal story.
Yeah, in University of Colorado, they offer something called Semester at Sea, which is a study abroad program, which is literally 3 months on the cruise ship. There's no age limit. So, if you're 55 and have some excess money and you want to go on a cruise ship with a bunch of college kids, go to University of Colorado.
Oh man, I bet that'll be a blast. Yeah, that is just amazing information. Thank you so much, Brian, for all of that. I was trying to kind of jot down notes there throughout that as much as possible. One question that I have, with that, kind of estate maximizer, Can you talk a little bit more on, that acceleration of the gift and just what that means? Just kind of dumb that down for us quickly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So normally I could write you a check, Emmett. I'm a single tax filer, so I could write you a check for $17,000 this year. If I were to give you any more money than that, then I would either be paying gift taxes, which is 40%, or I'd be drawing down on something called the lifetime estate and gift tax exclusion, which is the amount that you can pass to your heirs, the size of the estate, without paying any gift taxes. So with 529 plans, you can simply do 5 years of that gifting up front at once. So it's 17,000 times 5. So that's where that 85,000 comes from as a single tax filer. So with the 529 plan, you can gift $85,000 up front as a single tax filer. And if you're married, then there's two people, right, in that marriage, and they could each give 85,000. So 5 years from each of them, so that's 170,000. And the reason people consider that, often grandparents, is I want to give this gift, I'm going to give them an inheritance. I want to give it, when I'm alive and they can use it versus after I pass. And also when people start seeing those costs of education, right, you're talking $525,000 for a newborn today at a private 4-year private school. They want to get that head start and they want to front load the 529 plan. And that's why the IRS designed that rule. And that's why you can do the 5-year gifting in the 529 plan, but you can't do it other places because the IRS wants people effectively to give their kids a chance to have a head start on saving and investing for education.
That's talking about, kind of adding a lot in, all at once, which obviously that's great. So any grandparents listening in or, that rich uncle that, is out there, definitely, let's talk more about that. Say just for like parents, is there any contribution limit with 529 plans at all?
So there's a limit at the plan level, and that's set by the state in which you reside, and so in which the plan resides, and that's going to be different from state to state. So, for example, with John Hancock's plan, ours is $475,000 is our plan maximum. So that would technically be the maximum in a year, right? Which would also be the maximum for the life of that plan. There's no technical annual limit in terms of gifting into a 529 plan, whether it's mom and dad, aunt, uncle, grandma and grandpa, whomever, right? You do want to keep in mind your gifting limits of 17 and 34 and your 5-year, gifting limits, but you could go above and beyond that, max out the plan. If you're doing that, then you're going to be drawing down on those estate and gift tax exclusions that I mentioned before.
So a lot of different moving parts there. I know, Marcus, you're trying to get in on that. I just wanted to, kind of dig a little bit deeper there. And I do have one other question, but Marcus, I'll let you jump in.
I would say I have like 3, but I'm going to try to keep them simple. First, you mentioned the UTMA and UGMA accounts. And clearly you explained the differences between that and the 529. The 529 is flexibility with changing the beneficiary, but likely also being able to change the owner. But with the UTMA and UGMA accounts, it doesn't seem that flexible, right? My question, if you have an answer or if you happen to know, is what happens if someone passes away? Because we did talk about estate planning as well. What happens upon the death of a minor or the death of a custodian for the UTMA, UGMA account? Do we have any answer or information on that?
That's a good one. I actually don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. For a 529 plan, well, I can answer for the 529 plan, but the UGMA and UTMA, I'm not sure exactly how that would work. So with the 529 plan, you can only have one owner and one beneficiary, but you can also name a successor owner. So if the owner were to pass away, then it would go to the successor owner. If, say, the owner, often the owner, the successor owner is like mom's the owner, dad's the successor owner. If, say, they were in a plane together and they both passed away at once, then the beneficiary or their legal guardian would be responsible for naming a new owner, and that owner cannot be themselves. So it can't be the same beneficiary. And if the beneficiary were to pass away in the 529, then the owner could take a non-qualified distribution. The 10% penalty would be waived. So there's a 10% penalty for non-qualified distributions. That will be waived in the event of death of the beneficiary, but you'd still have to pay taxes on the earnings there.
All right, so I'm going to circle back. I'm going to jump in here and circle back here real quick as far as contributions go. So we talked about like some really, big contributions and some clever ways to kind of get money out of an estate. Don't let that scare you away from just starting somewhere as well, right? So don't think, oh, geez, $250,000 for my newborn to go to college. I'm never going to be able to save all of that. Starting somewhere is a huge step, right? And so, Brian, is there a minimum or, a minimum entry level for, 529 accounts at all?
Yeah, if you're going to put in like a one-time amount, it's for our plan, right? Every plan's different. Like I only speak to mine, is $250. Or if you're doing an automatic contribution, so you're bringing in money, let's say monthly or quarterly, it's $50 the minimum. And if you went in with $50 in the automatic plan, you can always turn that automatic plan off too. So, but $250 for the lump sum, automatic contributions.
Yeah, and as time goes on, I was looking at a scenario with a client today who had their first daughter born in December of last year, and we looked at, starting with an initial contribution of about $2,000, adding $200 per month. That would take care of almost half of that child's tuition, with a moderate growth rate of 6%. So, small steps can make a big impact down the road as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say it's important to remind people there, especially if you have kids in, high school, middle school, and you're looking at those numbers, is, make sure you're sitting down at the financial services office of that school. All those sticker prices are negotiable. So every tuition price that you see out there, you can negotiate that, right? So if your kid is really good at academics and maybe they got into a top tier school, but they go that next tier down, well, they might be able to get a better financial aid package. They might be able to negotiate, that sticker price. There may be 8 out there, right? Often they make you go through an interview process and go through a whole bunch of meetings and make it difficult for you, but there's ways to, reduce the cost.
There's the hidden gem of the whole evening. Wow.
I just wouldn't know where that was in 2011 to 2012 when I was getting ready to go to VCU. Like, I had no idea you can negotiate that stuff. That's ridiculous.
I wish there's a lot of this stuff that I wish I knew, and I wish my parents knew it as well.
Right. So to piggyback off of that, actually, that's I'll say that's my last question for the evening. I know Emmett's happy about that. Clearly, this is more than just a 529 presentation, right? It's completely more than just saving. Saving is a great step. Is there a recommendation or a suggestion that you have on how frequent people should be visiting college planning within their financial plan? A little bit deeper than just looking at how much we're saving towards college, but clearly the FAFSA thing, you mentioned 2 changes with FAFSA. You mentioned what percentage of assets are going to be counted towards that. Is there a recommendation that you have on how often college planning should be reviewed within a financial plan?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I have a set answer for you, like every year, every 3 years. I think it's important if you have younger children, is looking at, okay, what are some of the different costs? There's a lot of calculators out there that we have, and you could run is, okay, so if I want to go to a Virginia in-state school, what is that going to look like in 18 years from today? If I think my kid's going to go to Harvard, what is that going to look like? If I just want to, price out what a 4-year private, out-of-state school looks like, what are those costs, and what are some numbers that can help us get there? What are my goals as a parent? Do I want to try to, save 25% or 50% or 75 or 100% of my, kids, school, right? And then as my financial situation changes over time, I got that promotion. Okay, well, maybe I want to put a little bit more towards education savings. And I would say, as your kids get older into middle school and high school, then you really want to be, probably looking at it every year, right? Did anything change with legislation in terms of, like this one, the grandparent-owned 529 plans? Because maybe mom and dad have a 529 that I want to change to grandma and grandpa's name, willing to give up control to my parents, the grandparents, because that's going to maximize the ability to get, financial aid. And I'd also say you want to review your individual 5 to 9 plan annually when you're doing all the rest of your reviews, right? Is it stacking up in terms of, performance? Where do we stand there? Do we want to, are we overfunding it, underfunding it? Did we go from having 1 kid to having 2 kids? Maybe we want to start contributing to the second kid's 5 to 9, or carve some off the first kids for the second kids because we want to invest it differently for each of those beneficiaries. So I would say probably annually, I guess, is what I would kind of talk myself into right here.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you joining us. I know it's kind of after hours here a little bit, and thank you all for joining us for this information. Those questions that you do have, those notes that you took, feel free to reach out to Marcus and me, and we would love to have a conversation with you specifically on your and your family's needs when it comes to college savings. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.